Hey folks, welcome to ADSR. I'm Stephen Ellestad. Make sure you subscribe to the ADSR YouTube channel and follow on social media for great production content. So in this ADSR first look video, I wanted to introduce a new plugin I came across recently called Levels. It's been developed by 29 Palms in conjunction with Mastering the Mix, and it's a really unique approach to looking at what's happening in your tracks across the master bus, and specifically looking at common problematic areas and calling your attention to issues that might be existing in your current mix. So Levels is designed to give you some real-time metering, but not only that, to actually call your attention to problem areas. And so let me go ahead and play a little bit of this track we have. We can see we've got this dynamic meter here with a mono button we can trigger on and off just to be checking some aspects of our mix. And so we can see as I click that on and off and actually started in mono that we could definitely first hear the mix going wider and more narrow, but we also saw the headroom section actually turn red. And that what's happening here is the plugin itself is looking at specific levels and parameters, which we can set right here. What are our peak threshold, LUFS threshold, stereo balance, etc. And then triggering a section to turn red whenever there's a potential problem with that kind of area. So when I click this, I actually go into a headroom section and it'll let me track what's happening there. And it shows me my levels as well as my peak levels. And it also shows me this in LUFS. If you're not familiar with LUFS, LUFS is a fairly new standard which stands for loudness units relative to full scale. And it was developed initially for broadcast purposes. It's a very accurate way of looking at the actual perception or perceptual loudness instead of strictly the signal strength. It's a very accurate scale, and we can use this to really gauge the actual loudness of our mix instead of just the actual output gain. In that sense alone, we can see that our headroom is generally around -5, but our loudness levels are changing over time, and we can use these to look at whether it's specific sections, maybe when we move into section automation, or just the overall balance of the track. And so the headroom section is a really nice place to look at it. Another really cool aspect of that, I think, that's tied to it is our dynamic range. And so dynamic range is basically a running average as the song progresses between that peak and that average level, and using the LUFS scale. So we can go ahead and play, and we're going to see an oscilloscope display which will change color over time depending on how dynamic a particular part of a section is. And I find this to be both a very interesting visual correlation, but it's also a really effective way to find the specific phrases or sections that are having, say, dynamic issues. So let's give that a listen. So we can see as I brought that bass level up, first of all, my headroom spiked because I added a bunch of low frequency energy there, but I also moved into a section of the oscilloscope display turning orange, and then eventually it was going to turn red if I didn't stop it. And so I can see not only that at some point I had some dynamic range issues, but watching it, I can see how they change over time. So I actually think that's a really cool approach to looking at things like that in your mix, and I think it might be a pretty cool tool to work with in my mixes moving forward. The two other aspects of this that are really cool are that we have one, our stereo field, which is a pretty typical phase meter, with a nice low pass filter, and we can see our correlation meters swinging from side to side, left to right, and positive and negative. Gives us a pretty good look at what's happening inside of the stereo field of our track. And whenever we want to get back to that main meter, click the level's name there. We just want to hear left or right. That's good. And they actually recommend that when you're in mono to only check one side or the other, mostly because what's happening is when you play both of them together, you're going to hear kind of a hyped low end, which we might want to watch out for. And so the last section of this plugin, and I thought this was really cool, is this actually looks at the bass space. One of the biggest issues that we have in most mixes is that our low end gets muddy. Well, this is because obviously low frequency sounds take more energy, but that also takes up more space in the sound field. When we go into the bass space plugin, it actually tells us to mute our kick and our bass. And now we're going to listen to it, and we're actually going to see a visual display of what's happening in these low frequencies. But we've gotten rid of the things that are supposed to be there, so we're only looking at problem areas. So you can see when we do that, it's actually showing us what's happening: 40 hertz, 80 hertz, 120, and 160. And those areas that are certainly the sections of the frequency spectrum that are going to cause us most muddiness problems. And we want those areas to be fairly clear, except for, say, our kick drum and our bass. And so that metering that I saw there tells me that I could probably go in and apply some pass filters and clean up some space on the low end. All told, this is a pretty cool approach. I really like how it's calling your attention to different aspects of the mix and giving you some really good interactive visual indicators of what's happening and how to fix that. So if you're looking for a new way to look at your mix, work with it kind of dynamically as you're moving through the mix and not strictly rely on the traditional metering styles, this really might be something worth checking out. Overall, I'm going to give this 2 thumbs up because I think it's a really cool approach and definitely a new way of looking at that dynamic mix process. So yeah, so this is Levels again by 29 Palms in conjunction with Mastering the Mix. And I will throw a little bit of information on the screen here so you can see what it is. It's coming out in July 19th, 2016, and 32 or 64-bit VST, AU, and AAX plugin. So I think this is a pretty cool plugin. I think it's definitely worth checking out if you're looking for a new way to look at your master bus and what's happening in your mix. I'm Stephen Ellestad for ADSR. Again, please make sure you subscribe to the ADSR YouTube channel and follow on social media. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day.